Hi everyone, this is Anders Ibsen from Windermere Professional Partners, managing broker of Anders Ibsen Homes. Now, your home is your biggest investment, but it should also be your smartest investment too. When we look at the condition of your home, condition plays a major role, of course, in the market value of your property, but even if you're not thinking of selling anytime soon, how well maintained your house is at the end of the day also just plays a role in how enjoyable it is to live in it. So the purpose of this video today is to just go over some of the most practical day-to-day maintenance tips that can not only enhance the value of your home, but just make it more livable and pleasant to be in. So let's take a look. Generally, we like water. We like looking at it, we like living next to it, but your house really does not. Unless water is coming right out of a fixture or unless it's coming out of a sink, generally you want to keep it away from your house whenever you can. So let's start with your roof. Your roof collects rainwater because it's the Pacific Northwest. And what's really common with older homes around here, unfortunately, is poor drainage and diversion. Usually the downspouts just drop the water right next to the foundation. And that's really problematic for a couple of reasons. One, in the short term, you're going to lead to moisture conditions in your basement or your crawl space because when the water accumulates near your foundation, because concrete is porous, that water is going to seep through and it's going to lead to leakage in your crawl space, leakage in your basement potentially, and that can lead to all sorts of problems like mold, encouraging wood-destroying organisms, and other issues. Over the long term, more insidiously, that can lead to foundation problems. Generally, the biggest cause of big structural issues with foundations is water that's been pooling up against that foundation for years and years, shifting the soil underneath the house, and that's when you start to see those big cracks. So how do we deal with this? Just get the water away. Ideally, you want more diversion from your downspouts. So that's usually the standard you find with newer construction. But in the absence of PVC drain pipes that take the rainwater away from the house towards the street, the next best thing is just get some splash guards, which you can just get for $5 or $10 at a hardware store, and make sure the water is at least 6 feet away from your foundation when it falls down. While we're talking about foundations, make sure to look at your topography too. If you have negative grade topography, which means that the hill or the soil is sloping towards your house, what do you think water does? It goes downhill. So that's going to lead to the same problem even if you have great gutters. So make sure that you're just looking at where the water wants to go, and if necessary, alter the topography so the water is going away from your house. Now that's water outside of your house. Let's talk a little bit more about water inside your house. We all know that leaks are bad for a variety of reasons, but probably the number one thing you can do to prevent interior damage from water is with bathrooms. And in particular, we're talking about moisture from showers. So you should always have your fan on when you're taking a shower because the accumulation of warm, moist air can lead to mildew and just bad stuff inside your bathroom. But what you should also really take a look at is your attic, because in older homes, it's really common for the exhaust fan ductwork from your bathroom fan to not necessarily connect directly to the outside. So that's a new construction standard for newer built homes, is that anytime you have that warm, moist air from a bathroom fan, from someone taking a shower, for example, that it has to be directly vented to the outside of the home to just get rid of it. But what do you think happens if you have a bunch of warm, moist air blowing around inside your attic? What does mold want? Mold or any other kind of organic growth wants moisture and it wants poor airflow. So if you don't want mold in your attic, divert that warm, moist air. It's a very simple handyman or general contractor fix to just correct that ductwork inside your attic, and you'll save yourself a lot of grief down the road. Your roof literally covers everything. A compromised roof can lead to all sorts of damage down the road, so it's vital that you get ahead of maintaining it. It's pretty painful to replace too. A good asphalt composition roof starts around $10,000, and depending on the height and depending on the footprint of your house, it can easily escalate much higher than that, maybe 20 or more. Thankfully, maintaining your roof is not that expensive and it's pretty easy. One of the simplest things you can do is just put some moss killer on your roof, because we're in the Pacific Northwest, moss is everywhere. All you have to do is just go to a hardware store and just put some of that white powder stuff you see on top of your roof just once a year during the rainy season, and that can take care of moss before it really starts to build up and harm the granularity in your asphalt shingles. But it's also just common sense stuff. Keep debris off of your roof so it doesn't lead to blockage in your gutters, and just clean your gutters in general. That prevents water from accumulating. Also look at the flashing on your roof to make sure that there isn't any leakage, and if there's the potential for that, make sure to caulk it appropriately so you can prevent water from seeping into your attic. Finally, don't be your own worst enemy. Don't be one of those people who pressure washes an asphalt composition roof. I've seen that before, and that's a great way to take 10 or more years off the life of your roof and to make your roofer very happy. That being said, when in doubt, there's no shame in talking with an expert. Your roof is easily worth $10 to $20 or more $1,000, and when in doubt, talk to a specialist whose living it is to examine it to keep it alive longer. Wood-destroying organisms can cause significant structural damage to your home. Thankfully, it's really easy to keep them away. And it really just comes down to two things: deprive them of food and deprive them of building material. One of the easiest ways to not run in the path of a termite infestation, for example, is getting rid of any soil to siding contact, especially if you have wood siding, but even if you have siding like composite LP, for instance. If your wood siding is making contact with the ground, then that's an open invitation to termites or who knows what to start eating it or start making their home there. Similarly, if you have a crawl space, if you have any kind of 2x4s or wood debris or any kind of cellulose material inside the crawl space, especially if you don't have a vapor barrier inside, then that's food material, and that's going to start piquing their interest in getting them inside your home. Carpenter ants don't eat the wood in your home, but they use it to make their home, and they can tear it up just as effectively. But if you keep their building materials away from your house, you can really minimize the chance of them getting in there. So what are the biggest risk factors for carpenter ants? It's usually dead wood around your house. So if you have a rotting log, for example, or a rotting tree that's in close proximity, or even if you just have a bundle of firewood that's really close to your home, a carpenter ant colony is usually going to start making that your home, and they turn your house into kind of a satellite colony. So if you deprive them of that initial first step, you can usually keep them out of your home. So just by taking some preventative steps, you can really get ahead of some serious problems. But when in doubt, consult with an expert. Talk with a good pest control provider who can walk your property, advise you of your biggest risk factors, and take appropriate action. Rodents are unfortunately pretty common everywhere, and here in the Pacific Northwest, it's not uncommon to see rodent infestations. When they get inside, they can cause some pretty serious damage. Rodent infestation in your attic or crawl space can mean torn up insulation, it can mean gnawing on the structure of your home, it can mean biohazards, it can mean dead animals that attract other bad things. So you want to get ahead of that problem. And thankfully the risk factors are pretty obvious. It's access. So if you deny areas of access into your home, you can really minimize the chance. Anytime there is an exposed way into your crawl space, whether it's just not having a crawl space hatch, having openings in the ventilation for your crawl space, or even just really large cracks in your foundation, you should just treat that as you should presume that you have an active infestation of your crawl space. Same thing with your attic. If you have glaring holes in your soffits, your fascia boards, if there's any obvious way through the ventilation perhaps into your attic, then you should just presume that you have critters of some kind in your attic. Same thing with birds. Birds can try to access your attic to make nests, they can rough up your insulation, they can die in your attic, they can leave all sorts of messes that are hazardous to your home's health and safety. So what are you going to do? Just like the creepy crawlies, hire an expert. Have a licensed, bonded, and insured pest control operator walk around your house, evaluate the risk factors, and shut down the access points into the structure of your home. That's a great way to stay on top of this issue and to make sure that really expensive damage to your home does not happen. Now this one seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how often you see it. If you have wood siding, wood trim, wood fascia boards, wood decking, keep the paint and keep the staining current. Wood is actually surprisingly a very good siding material here in the Pacific Northwest, but that's only if you keep the coat of paint in good shape and if you stay ahead of problems like bubbling of the paint, peeling, chipping, then you can keep that wood alive a lot longer than having to replace it. But as soon as you neglect that, and as soon as it's exposed to the elements and starts getting wood rot, for example, then that's when you run into expensive repairs. And moreover, if you do intend to sell down the road or even get a refinance, chipped paint, peeling paint, wood rot are very common work orders called up by appraisers. I mean, I would know, I am one. I've done that many times myself. So looking at the relative expenses, a bucket of paint or stain versus the cost of a brand new deck, it's not even close. Energy efficiency is one of the most efficient ways you can not only save on your monthly costs, but also add some significant value add to your home's value, but only if it's installed correctly. Something I see very commonly with homes that I've previewed, inspection reports that I've read, is improperly installed insulation, in particular what's called bat and roll insulation. And what that looks like is when you see paper on one side and when you see the kind of cotton candy looking insulation material on the other side. So the most common incorrect way that I see it installed is it's installed upside down. So for example, being in a basement or a finished room and seeing the paper side facing down, that's incorrect. What you're doing is you're not only not properly insulating the space, but you're actually basically creating an air bubble where moisture can build up. So it's actually counterproductive for your home's insulation, and it can actually lead to some problems down the road. I also see some really common problems include putting insulation on the ceilings of attics. That's also a big no-no. The attic is kind of the lung of your house. It's how air moves through your home and heat rises. So if you're impeding the airflow of heat that's trying to leave your house, you can actually lead to the same problem. You can lead to moisture buildup. And just like with our conversation about water, if warm, moist air starts building up in the attic, what do you think happens? Organic growth. So if you don't want mold, then leave the insulation off the ceiling of your attic. And finally, if you have any kind of insulation, bat and roll, blown in or otherwise, and if you happen to have older types of wiring, like knob and tube, for example, then keep your insulation very far away from that because that can lead to a fire hazard. A furnace is a core component of your home, and if you show it some love and you regularly maintain it, it can easily last 15 to 20 years. And it's really not that hard, and it's not that expensive to do so. A good furnace servicing by a reputable HVAC company, it's usually only a few $100. You only need that once a year. But what you can also do to maintain it throughout the year is just clean the filter. Filters are pretty cheap, and if you just do that at least a couple times per year, or ideally once per quarter, not only are you keeping your furnace alive a lot longer because the moving parts in the furnace aren't working as hard, and so they last longer as a result, but it's also a direct health and safety impact on you, because besides warming and cooling your house, your furnace also helps you breathe because it's moving air through your house. And so if there's a bunch of gunk that continues to build up inside your furnace and you're not taking care to clean it, then that's the air you're breathing. If you have asthma or other conditions, that can lead to a degradation in your health. Whereas if you're regularly keeping it clean, you're going to notice positive health impacts because your air is cleaner. So invest in yourself as well as your house. The side sewer is the portion of pipe that connects your home's waste pipe to the city's sewer main. It's generally the homeowner's responsibility, and as long as you just do some basic, simple maintenance, it's going to stay alive for a long time. In older neighborhoods here in Tacoma, generally you're looking at cast iron or concrete material, unless it's been replaced, in which case it's usually the newer PVC material, which will last for a very long time, upwards of 50 years. The two biggest problems that we see with side sewers are usually some variation of just a buildup of gunk, sewage, and other materials, or tree roots that infiltrate the sewer pipe because bio-waste is plant food, or so that's what the plant thinks. The best way to stop the debris is just to not put crud down your drain. And there's a good acronym that plumbers use. It's called FOG. FOG stands for fat, oils, and grease. And so if you're making bacon or if you're eating some delicious mashed potatoes with butter in them, just resist the temptation to dump it down the drain. Just wipe your plate with a paper towel and just throw that away in the trash, and then just take care of your pipes. That's the most cost-effective way. As for root intrusion, you just have to be aware of a couple things. One, where the side sewer is located, and two, what kind of trees are in that vicinity. You might want to consult with a licensed plumber as well as an arborist to see what kind of species you might be able to replace that tree with if you continue to see aggressive root invasion of the side sewer time and time again. If you can keep the gunk and you can keep the roots out of your side sewer, it's going to stay alive for a long time. But that being said, if your side sewer is nearing the end of its life, then there actually are some really good programs out there. If you live in the city of Tacoma, we have a program called the Sewer Conservation Loan, which can lend up to $10,000, which that's pretty close to the cost of a full replacement of a side sewer. And they always, by law, have the rate of the sewer loan below the prime rate. So even with higher rates these days, you can still get a pretty good outcome for replacing a very important part of your home's value and a health and safety feature too. So if you have any questions about that, you can always check out the City of Tacoma's website for the Sewer Conservation Loan, in the worst case if your side sewer really needs replacement. But most of all, it's just preventative maintenance. Now, most of these maintenance tips are not that intimidating. It's mostly just small stuff done consistently, and if you do them, then your home is going to be just fine. But there are a few components of your home that if you have them, you probably should get ahead of replacing them sooner rather than later for health or safety reasons, if not just taking care of something that's just going to get more expensive with time. The most important of which is your electrical system, in particular your panel. There are two well-known electrical panels that were not exactly recalled, but were basically recalled. They are called Federal Pacific and Zinsco, and they are known fire hazards because they tend to overload with the electrical current. They don't properly manage it the same way modern electrical panels do, which can lead to, it does lead to electrical fires in many cases. So if you have a Federal Pacific or if you have a Zinsco electrical panel, then sooner rather than later, it would really be in your best interest to talk with a licensed, bonded, and insured electrician to replace them. In the grand scheme, panels aren't that expensive. They're probably $3,000 to $6,000 to replace, which compared to a home rewire of $10,000 to $15,000, it's pretty affordable. So that's definitely something that should be pretty close to the top of your list. While we're on the topic of electrical, if you have older wiring like knob and tube, sometimes that can be a risk, but other times not. And that's why it's really important to get your wiring evaluated by a professional who can tell you one way or another. Knob and tube is a phrase that you probably hear a lot. It's an older, well-known wiring system that was common in the early to mid 20th century. And knob and tube isn't inherently dangerous, but it can be a risk of electrical fire when you run large currents, which are mostly generated by modern appliances, all at once on the same circuit. That can lead to overheating, and then that's when you can lead into electrical fires. Also, if there are just things that are wrong with where the wires are put in place, like if they're surrounded by insulation in your attic, for example, that can also lead to overheating. But regardless, don't take it from me, don't even take it from a home inspector. Take the perspective and feedback of a licensed, bonded, and insured electrician to properly vet your system and make recommendations. Now, plumbing won't kill you if it's bad, but it can cause a lot of damage and can just cause you a giant headache. The plumbing system that's probably going to give you the most grief, and that's fairly common here in the North End, is what's called galvanized plumbing. Galvanized plumbing is cast iron which is coated with zinc. It's galvanized with zinc, and it was big in the 1960s and onwards until it was discontinued later in the 20th century because it has a tendency to corrode over time. And there are a couple telltale signs when you can tell your galvanized plumbing is on its last legs. One is if you just look at it and it has that ferrous kind of rusty color near the fittings. But the biggest telltale sign that you really need to repipe your house is water pressure. If your water pressure in your kitchen, your bathroom, your major fixtures are just nothing, or they're just pretty close to nothing, then that's a pretty clear indicator that sediment buildup and corrosion is really taking its toll on your pipes. And there's no way to repair it. You just have to replace them. So get your plumbing, if you have galvanized, get it evaluated by a licensed, bonded, and insured plumber, and just make that decision. And it's not an inherent health and safety issue the same way that electrical is, but it's definitely something you want to get ahead of. And when you do replace it, it is a pretty significant value add. So keep that in mind too. Finally, no conversation about obsolete home materials would be complete without discussing Orangeburg. Orangeburg was a side sewer material that was really big in the mid 20th century. Thankfully, you don't see it too much here in the North End. It's mostly in suburban areas like Fircrest or northern Puyallup, where the homes were really built out in the 50s and 60s, for example. But it's nothing but trouble. Orangeburg is a resin material that tends to collapse in on itself over time, and it just becomes like a wet cardboard. And that's how you end up with biohazards in your crawl space. It's never a good time. So if you do have Orangeburg, if you discover it from your home inspection, for example, then unfortunately, you just know that you have a ticking time bomb on your hands. A plumber can potentially keep it alive a little bit longer by putting a liner through it, but really the only solution to Orangeburg is replacement. And if you do live in the city of Tacoma, that's where that sewer conservation loan program can really come in handy. So just make sure to budget for that accordingly and just be prepared. Finally, let's talk about the quality of home improvements themselves. What I can definitively say after being in the real estate industry since 2013 is that if you have a house that's completely dated with no updates compared to a house with poorly done amateur updates, then every single time the unupdated house will sell for more money and it will be easier to sell. Do not sabotage yourself by looking on HGTV or YouTube and thinking that you're a general contractor all of a sudden. If you are just doing something simple and preventative, like maybe caulking your shower or replacing some flooring or putting a new baseboard or trim, then sure, go for it. That's harmless. But if you have no construction background or no professional training or professional experience of any kind with HVAC or electrical or plumbing, then don't be a hero. Not only are you setting yourself back in terms of having your house sell for less or potentially not at all, depending on what kind of market conditions you have, but it's just going to be endless frustration for you because you have to live with it. So when in doubt, there's no shame in having an expert look at your house. It's your biggest investment. It should also be your smartest. So this is just a summary of the 10 biggest things that you can look at as a homeowner. As you can see, most of these are really attainable. They're not intimidating, and most of them are pretty cheap. If you just love your house and stay ahead of these issues, then you can not only maintain or grow the equity you have in it, but just make it more enjoyable to live in while you still are there. If you ever have any questions about home maintenance, good contractors that you'd like recommended, or just general questions about the market, you can always call, text, or email me anytime. Thanks so much for watching. Keep the questions coming. Have a great day.